Picture this. You are in ancient Rome. It is an ordinary Tuesday morning. You have just finished using a public communal toilet, a long stone bench with a series of holes cut into it, shared simultaneously with dozens of strangers. There are no private stalls, no paper dispensers on the wall, no flushing mechanism. Instead, you reach for the xylospongium, a sea sponge fixed to the end of a wooden stick, sitting in a shared bucket of salt water on the floor beside you. You use it to clean yourself. You rinse it in the bucket. You place it back. The next person will reach for the same sponge after you. This was not considered primitive or disgusting. This was normal life in one of history's most technically sophisticated civilizations. And toilet paper? That concept did not exist yet, not even remotely. We take that cardboard roll completely for granted today. It is there when we need it, soft, disposable, and utterly unremarkable. But for nearly all of recorded human history, one of the most basic biological facts of daily life was solved by improvisation, by whatever material was locally available, culturally acceptable, and cheap enough for the population to use. The story of how we got from a shared sponge on a stick to quilted two-ply comfort is longer, stranger, and far more revealing about human civilization than most people realize. Let us start at the very beginning. The earliest documented evidence of deliberate hygiene practices after using the toilet comes from ancient Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq. Archaeologists excavating sites from approximately 2500 BCE have found pottery shards specifically identified as cleansing implements. Broken ceramic pieces, used exactly as you are imagining right now. Ancient Greeks used what they called passoi, small oval stones or smooth ceramic fragments designed in size for this specific purpose. These have been recovered from ancient latrines at multiple sites across the Mediterranean world. Their shape and the wear patterns on their surfaces leave very little ambiguity about their function. The playwright Aristophanes, writing comedies in the 5th century BCE, referenced passoi in his work, evidence that bathroom humor and bathroom practices were entirely culturally universal, even in classical antiquity. Some things about human beings have never changed. The Romans had the xylospongium we described at the opening. The historian Barry Hobson, in his detailed study, Latrinae et Forcae, Toilets in the Roman World, describes Roman public latrines as genuinely social spaces, places where people sat side by side on stone benches over channels of running water and conducted business conversations and social interactions simultaneously. The xylospongium was rinsed between uses with salt water or vinegar, which offered some antimicrobial benefit, though nothing approaching modern sanitization standards. It was shared infrastructure, like a public water fountain, except considerably less pleasant to think about. Options varied dramatically, depending on geography and social status. Depending on where you lived and your position in society, your cleansing materials might include leaves, moss, grass, hay, corn cobs, or water used with the left hand. That last option is the direct origin of one of the world's most enduring and widespread cultural taboos. Across ancient cultures, stretching from North Africa through the Middle East and across South Asia, the left hand was designated ritually unclean, specifically because it was reserved for toilet hygiene. This taboo persists today in dozens of modern cultures worldwide, a behavioral artifact of sanitation practices that began thousands of years ago. Moving forward to medieval Europe, and the picture changes, though it does not necessarily improve. Wealthy European nobles had access to wool, hemp cloth, or lace. soft materials that could be laundered by servants and reused. The English royal court had a specifically designated official called the Groom of the Stool, whose formal responsibilities included assisting the monarch with personal hygiene. Despite the title's implications, this was actually considered a politically significant and genuinely prestigious position at court. Proximity to the king during his most private moments translated into unparalleled personal access and, therefore, real political influence. Henry VIII's Groom of the Stool, Hugh Dennis, was considered among the most powerful men in England during his tenure. For common people, the solution was far less refined. Hay, straw, and dried moss were standard across rural areas. In coastal communities, mussel shells and smooth river stones were practical alternatives. Monks in European monasteries, who had access to relatively sophisticated sanitary facilities by medieval standards, commonly used torn scraps of old manuscript pages, a deeply ironic fate for documents that were among the most valuable objects in the medieval world. Across the Islamic world during this same period, a very different approach was standard. Islamic jurisprudence established specific guidelines for post-toilet cleanliness, a practice called istinja, emphasizing water as the primary and preferred cleansing method. This was documented in religious texts and widely practiced throughout Muslim-majority regions from Spain to Central Asia. European crusaders who traveled through the Middle East during the 11th through the 13th centuries frequently wrote about their surprise at local hygiene practices in their journals. The adoption of these practices back in Europe, however, was slow and inconsistent for centuries afterward. Here is where the story takes a genuinely unexpected turn. Paper was invented in China around 105 CE by Kai Lun, an official of the Han Dynasty court. But the transition from writing paper to personal hygiene paper was not immediate. It took approximately 5 centuries. The earliest recorded reference to paper being used for hygiene appears in the writing of Yan Zhitui, a Chinese scholar who wrote in 589 CE that he would not dare use paper-bearing quotations from the 5 classics or the names of revered sages for toilet purposes. This statement implies that using paper for this function was already standard enough by 589 CE that educated people felt it necessary to set some boundaries around which paper was appropriate. By the 14th century, China's Zhejiang province was manufacturing paper specifically designed for imperial hygiene. Records from the court of the Yongle Emperor in the early 15th century indicate that the imperial household received approximately 720,000 sheets of soft personal hygiene paper annually. That calculates to roughly 2,000 sheets, delivered every single day, exclusively for the royal household and its immediate staff. This practice, despite existing trade routes between East and West, did not transfer to Europe. Europeans had access to paper by the 13th century through Arab trade intermediaries, but using it for personal hygiene did not follow as a practice. The cost of paper, combined with deeply embedded cultural habits and the sheer inertia of established behavior, meant that European populations continued with rags, hay, and other materials for centuries after Chinese courts were using purpose-manufactured hygiene paper. The real transformation arrived in the 19th century, specifically in the United States. In 1857, a New York businessman named Joseph Gaiety launched what he called Gaiety's Medicated Paper, the first commercially produced and commercially sold toilet paper in the United States. Each sheet was pre-moistened with aloe vera extract and printed directly with Gaiety's name, reflecting his considerable confidence in the product's future. He marketed it exclusively as a medical product, positioning it as a treatment and preventive measure for hemorrhoids. It retailed at 50 cents for 500 sheets, a meaningful expense for the era, and was sold in pharmacies alongside other health products, rather than in general goods stores. The product was real and commercially available, but it did not immediately transform American habits. A significant portion of the American population continued using the pages of Sears Roebuck and Montgomery Ward mail-order catalogs, whose thin paper was well suited for the purpose. Both companies pre-drilled a hole through the corner of each catalog specifically for hanging from an outhouse hook. When Sears transitioned to glossy-coated paper in the early 20th century, they received documented public complaints about the loss of what had become a valued secondary function. The format-defining innovation arrived in 1890 when Seth Wheeler of Albany, New York, received a patent for perforated toilet paper mounted on a cardboard tube, the identical format that remains universal today. His original patent drawings, held at the United States Patent and Trademark Office and available for public review, show the paper positioned rolling over the top of the tube. For everyone who has engaged in the ongoing cultural debate about the correct orientation of a toilet paper roll, Wheeler's 1890 patent documents the definitive original answer. Even with perforated rolls commercially available, mass adoption required additional time. Indoor plumbing wasn't yet universal across the United States, particularly in rural areas. Victorian cultural norms made open advertising of bathroom products deeply uncomfortable in polite society. The Scott Paper Company, founded in Philadelphia in 1879, addressed these barriers by framing toilet paper marketing around health and hygiene rather than the product's actual function, a strategy that proved both commercially successful and culturally effective. By the 1930s, the Northern Tissue Company was advertising its paper with the headline "Splinter-Free," providing evidence of how rough and potentially injurious earlier commercial products had actually been. Smooth, soft toilet paper was a genuine manufacturing achievement. Two-ply toilet paper arrived in 1942. Colored varieties, pink, blue, yellow, became fashionable during the 1950s as bathroom interior decorating gained cultural importance. By the mid-20th century, toilet paper had completed its journey from luxury item to universal baseline necessity across the industrialized world. The scale of modern consumption is staggering. The United States alone uses approximately 34 million rolls of toilet paper every single day. The global toilet paper market exceeds $30 billion in annual revenue. Americans use roughly 100 rolls per person per year, nearly double the rate of most Western European nations, and several times higher than consumption figures across Asia. And yet, for the majority of the world, toilet paper is not the primary solution. Japan's washlet toilet seats, which use precision warm water jets, heated seating, and warm air drying, are installed in the majority of Japanese homes and public restrooms. South and Southeast Asian populations rely predominantly on water. Most European countries include a bidet as standard bathroom equipment. Multiple public health researchers have noted that water-based cleansing is generally more thorough and less irritating than paper-based alternatives for routine use. In March of 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic produced one of the strangest episodes in toilet paper's commercial history. Panic buying strip store shelves across the United States, Australia, the United Kingdom, and Europe within a matter of days. Supply chains optimized for steady, predictable commercial to residential distribution could not respond quickly enough. For a brief and genuinely surreal period, a tube of perforated paper became the most